good afternoon. This is Allison Brown, the Executive Director of the Communities for Just Schools Fund. Everyone should be muted, but if for some reason you are not, please mute your lines now so that we don't get that same feedback that we just got. We'll get started in just a few seconds. We'll give folks a chance to join the webinar, and we'll get started in just a few seconds with the amazing panel that we have here for you. Okay. Well, welcome to this second part in a three-part series about communications and communications strategies. Today we are talking about conducting statewide campaigns and especially using social media strategically. So we will hear today from experts at the Hatcher Group. Amy Saltzman is Senior Vice President at the Hatcher Group, and Jeanne McCann is Vice President for Digital Strategy at the Hatcher Group. We also will be hearing from Communities for Just Schools Fund Community Partners, Chelsie Brooks, who is with Californians for Justice, and Maria De Guillo, who is with Voices of Youth in Chicago Education, or VOICE, along with Juan Padilla, who's also with VOICE in Chicago. Just a note that if you have questions along the way, we will open it up for Q&A at the end of the presentations, so that we'll open up your lines and you can speak your questions. But also, if you have questions or thoughts along the way, please feel free to put them into the questions box or the chat box in the webcam window on your screen, and we'll be sure to get to your questions and make sure that this is as interactive as possible. Also, a quick note that if you want to speak when it's time for Q&A, just hit hashtag 103 hashtag or pound 103 pound on your phone, and we'll be able to hear you. And I'll remind you of that again when we open up the lines for question and answer. And so with that, I will turn it now to Chelsie Brooks, who is the Development Manager for Californians for Justice. Chelsie?
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Chelsie Brooks. I work with Californians for Justice. We organize high school students around racial justice and education reform. And I am CFJ's development manager and a part of our 4-person communications team, which is where my experience comes in relevant to this webinar.
Okay, thank you, Chelsie. This is Amy Saltzman. I'm going to actually start things out today, and it'll include some questions for Chelsie about the approach that her group has taken to using traditional media. As Allison said, I am a Senior Vice President with the Hatcher Group, and I've worked on with a lot of groups specifically on the school-to-prison pipeline issue and other issues around poverty and education. So as Allison did mention, the bulk of this presentation is going to be on using social media to, create a drumbeat and ongoing interest and engagement in statewide campaigns. But that doesn't mean we should forget about traditional media, and I'm sort of starting out with that. The rest of this will be on social media, but I do want to emphasize that it still matters. And, when you're thinking about who your target audience is, particularly in a statewide campaign, people like state legislators and other government leaders read their local papers and keep a close eye on news stories, op-eds, and editorials that affect their districts. So it's really important from a strategic perspective to get your messages in front of their eyeballs, and social media is one way to do that, but traditional media remains a huge way. Also, many people still get their news from traditional media, even if they don't always realize it in some cases. A recent Pew Research Center report actually found that that while newspaper readers who report reading a newspaper in digital form or have some kind of digital subscription is down, like we would suspect, most people still get their news from these sources, by reading individual stories they come across on the web and that are ultimately hosted by a newspaper or other news organization's website. So even if you don't get a daily newspaper, read one yourself, chances are you're getting a lot of your news from those sources, and so are those that you're trying to reach. Next slide, please. So how do you engage the media? Well, first and foremost, with a good story. And I put as the first bullet point here, don't bury the news with insider jargon. And that's because I think there can be a particular danger when people work in coalitions where, a lot of people are speaking to themselves to get, into that insider language and not even always notice it. And reporters, are going to be turned off by that, or they won't understand it, and they have so much on their plate that they're just going to move on to something else. So even when we talk about things like, restorative justice or positive behavioral interventions and supports, what do we really mean? We can't just throw those terms out and expect that the media will understand. So that's part of, first part of telling a good story is using language that people really understand. Playing up the human side. I think most of you know this. Youth organizations are very good at doing this. One thing to keep in mind, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but how to use those stories strategically, and also to give reporters time to arrange interviews with these, examples of real people that they want to include in their stories, because sometimes that takes a little while. So when you're pitching reporters, give them, if you can, even a couple weeks, so they can round these folks up and really write a good in-depth piece that's going to get better play. Of course, you also any stories that you're trying to put out there need to have consistent messages and present clear goals. Before you start even engaging the media, you should make sure that you already have those in place. I did talk about this in some depth on our first webinar in this series, but just to refresh for those who weren't, and for those who weren't on the call, your messages need to present, what is the problem you're addressing? What are the specific challenges? What are the solutions or reforms that you're calling for to solve the problem? What action steps are needed to achieve those reforms? And then finally, what is the ultimate vision, the promise of what can be achieved if these problems are addressed, and the impact that can have on society as a whole. Next slide, please. So strategic storytelling, when we talk about strategic storytelling, we're basically, the point is that not all stories are created equal. First of all, effective stories embody your advocacy goals. They don't really present the problem through the eyes of, say, a student who was suspended, but they show how the programs that you're advocating for can actually change a school discipline culture that relies too heavily on suspensions, for instance. Really effective stories dispel stereotypes. In general, stories used to support your message should avoid even inadvertently reinforcing stereotypes or playing into the hands of those who, for instance, believe things like, if you work hard enough, you'll get ahead. Or, these kids, they just, they're just bad kids. They just mess up a lot. Research actually shows that stories about people who can't get a job, for instance, that pays a job that pays a living wage, lead people to focus on personal reasons for failure, such as drug use, teen childbirth, or dropping out of school. So we want to avoid anything that reinforces that kind of thinking. I put here an example of something because, I worked on this and it worked really well. I think this is, the example you see here is excerpted from a New York Times op-ed that we worked on with the California Endowment and the Open Society Foundation a few years back, as sort of the whole school to prison pipeline debate was really starting to heat up more. And it was an effort to address the disparities in students of color being suspended. So when the piece ran in early 2014, the assumption in a lot of communities was that more students of color were being kicked out of school because they engage in more disruptive, dangerous, defiant type behavior. So we wanted to do everything we could to counter that thinking. So we came up with this story, and one of the things that people were talking about is how kids were being suspended for minor incidents like not following the dress code. So we came up with this story of this principal in Baltimore who decided to install a washer and dryer at the school, so the kids who were homeless or didn't have easy access to laundry services could keep their uniforms clean and not get kicked out of school for showing up without the proper uniform simply because it was dirty, or in many cases kids were just not coming to school because they didn't have the correct uniform and they figured they'd be kicked out, they'd be bullied, any number of things. So the idea is that this example really helped dispel the stereotype that kids who don't wear the proper uniform to school are just being defiant. And I should also say it was an example that the New York Times editors loved because it was different and it showed real sort of out-of-the-box thinking. So, it's the kind of thing you should be looking for. Next slide, please. So Chelsie, who we just heard from, has done a lot on the issue of strategic storytelling with her organization. And this is an example of a campaign that they have called Flip the Frame, which in which they use strategic storytelling to dispel stereotypes. Chelsie, could you talk a little bit about the campaign and how you've used it to get stories out there that the media have been interested in?
Absolutely. So a little background, I think, on why we've used this strategy. CFJ, Californians for Justice's unique kind of add to the very big field of education reform is that we're able to really lead with youth voices because we're organizing young people. So we try to share stories that come directly from youth themselves rather than from adults kind of paraphrasing what we've heard or what they've said. And we've really seen, like on the ground, in traditional and social media, that youth sharing their own stories has helped to shift the perceptions and opinions of adults in the field. So we share these stories on social media, on our blog. We've had youth stories published by news sources, and it's been helpful to counter some of the negative stereotypes about young people that can hinder our success in getting youth voice into education decision-making spaces. So hearing those stories directly from young people shows that the issues they're speaking up about are real, that their opinions are really valuable, and we've seen the effects of that in, actual changing opinions of decision makers who are kind of skeptical about, youth giving input in important education decisions. And after hearing from our youth and hearing their stories, engaging with their campaigns, we end up with some pretty strong supporters of youth voice and allies in our work. So the Flip the Frame campaign, we use we kind of also call it the hashtag Flip the Frame campaign, was an effort to dispel some of the stereotypes that youth of color are facing in their schools and in their communities. So the campaign started with just selfies. Some of those you see here. We had students and some adults share photos with signs that said, "I am not," and then calling out a stereotype that they face. And then we followed that up with a drive collecting selfies stating what we are. So those are the photos that you see here. What are all the things that people don't see because of the stereotypes they have about us. And then we paired that with on-the-ground work. So we had several in-person events, and we used our Flip the Frame hashtag on almost every other thing that we sent out. So we ended up reaching about 10,000 people across 3 social media platforms, plus several hundred in person, and we've continued using the photos and hashtags throughout our work, and the effects of that have been really powerful. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback about the campaign. It's really helped to just open people's eyes to the issues that students are facing, and it's had an impact in our policy work, and kind of boosting, we have decision makers that are hearing student stories in person at meetings and things like that, and this has kind of helped back that up by having this really big, powerful visual campaign of students telling their own stories and combating those stereotypes.
Great. Well, thank you, Chelsie. That's really interesting and an important approach to combating stereotypes. And one of the things, next slide, please, that I think is important to keep in mind. You can come up with all these great campaigns, but the best way to get people to pay attention often is to get those messages into the media. So how do you get reporters to start buying into those messages and understanding themselves that maybe some of their approaches to talking about these issues have reinforced stereotypes? So one of the most important ways to go about this is creating a compelling pitch. So I'm going to talk a little bit about pitching right now, and what we mean when we say pitching. We don't mean a sales job. We mean something that is actually going to help the reporter in terms of coming up with a good story to present to their editor. This would be as opposed to something that is just an annoying thing in their inbox on something they don't even cover, which actually gets to the importance of knowing who covers your issues. Good pitches are informative, even entertaining at times. I'm going to give you an example of that, and avoid just boring at all costs, because again, reporters are getting inundated with information and pitches all day long. I was a reporter myself for years, and I know what that feels like, and you just don't have time to deal with it. So making something really pop out and grab their attention is what you should strive for. Next slide, please. So this is just a simple framework of an effective pitch. Every pitch is different. If you're very close to a particular reporter, obviously you'd approach things differently. But essentially, I think it's a good guideline. I always start with an email pitch, and if I don't hear back, maybe I'll follow that up with a call or even a tweet in some cases, maybe 24 hours later, or another email. But a good, well-framed pitch with a catchy subject line, or at least a subject line that's going to spark their interest, is a good way to start. And make your note friendly. Framing the story quickly, not a lot of background information up front, but a real, what's the story here? You can include a personal touch if you know the person, or at the very least, maybe if you've seen a story that they've done fairly recently on a related topic. Talk about how you thought that was a great story, and because of that felt they might be interested in what you were doing. Obviously, you want to note if you're offering an exclusive. If you're not, in most cases, it's probably not a good idea unless you really think a reporter is likely to do a big piece, and you've had some relationships with that reporter before. You want to, as I said, follow up with a call if you don't hear back. If you're doing an event of some kind or a major release, you want to send a reminder email or call the morning of the event or release, just to particularly if it's going to be an event that might attract TV coverage. Often they don't even decide what they're going to do till that morning, so it's a good idea to give them a reminder call. Avoid pitching during reporter deadlines. That's usually late afternoon. I try to do all my pitching, frankly, before 2:30. Some people say after 3:30, but unless it's a really breaking story, don't annoy reporters who are on deadline. And consider the calendar if you can. After holiday weekends, early in August, are very quiet times for news. So reporters are going to be more open to looking for, feature stories, things they can start working on, and it will be more open to your pitch. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give you a couple examples of pitches that we've done here at the Hatcher Group that have proven to be very effective. Because I think it's always good to see, what it really looks like. Now this first example is actually a pitch that doesn't really probably relate directly to anything you guys work on. It has to do with payday lending, which of course is something that has a huge effect on people living in poverty because they take out loans that they can't afford in many cases and then are stuck with these high interest rates, and it sort of leads to this cycle of poverty. So one of the groups I work with, CFED, does a lot of work in this area. And we wanted to get reporters interested in some rules that were supposed to be coming out from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau but had been delayed because of industry pushback. And so I wrote this pitch to Chico Harlan at the Washington Post, who covers a lot of issues related to wealth inequality. You can see at the bottom his response was, really intrigued by this idea, best pitch I've gotten in all of 2016. Thanks, Amy, I'm slammed on another story today, but maybe we could set up some time to talk on Thursday or Friday morning. So I thought, well, that's a pitch that worked. So basically, if you look at this, it's just, I think, what I was trying to do is be really informative and lead him towards a good story. So, heads up about a potentially interesting story about the payday lending regulation delays. I mentioned there that, a story that you guys saw, that about a year ago you wrote a story on this issue. So I wanted to give you an update on what's going on, that explain the situation that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is working on these regulations, but the industry's been pushing back and they haven't come out. I provided a lot of links in here so that he, didn't have to go, Googling everywhere to find all this. So, making it a little easy for him. I gave him a blog post that my client did that had a lot of great background. And then, this line, there are a number of potential angles in this story. So really walked him through the situation, conflicts going on in Congress around it, and then finally, who at CFED was available to talk to him. This resulted in a huge front page story in the business section of the Washington Post, and was actually, I think, very important in terms of pushing CFPB to start moving on this. And they ultimately did and issued the regulations. So it was a very successful. Next slide, please. So this is another example of a pitch that a colleague of mine did, who's known for these, first of all, known for getting extremely good stories placed very relatively easily and getting the attention of reporters. And he tends to use this kind of offbeat, humorous approach. So you can see here, this was a story about the crazy truancy laws in Texas. We were working with our client, Texas Appleseed, on this. So he starts it out pretty boldly. This is another story about Texas being different in a bad way, and then goes on to really lay it on pretty heavy. The state of Texas is running a legal mill that funnels kids charged with truancy into a special adult court, which then levies fines to support its own operations, and just walks through the utter, absurdity and horribleness of this whole approach. This pitch resulted in, just tons and tons of coverage, not only in Texas, but all over the country. It was part of an effort that over a 2-year period of steady coverage and filing lawsuits from Texas Appleseed and other groups resulted in Texas passing a law that got rid of the criminal courts, the criminal truancy courts. So it was a huge, huge victory. And I would argue that a lot of the initial reporting done on this and the pitching that we did helped spark this whole change. Next slide, please. Okay. So as I mentioned, targeting the right reporters is obviously key. You can't, the last thing, a reporter who covers something that has absolutely nothing to do with what you're working on is just going to be annoyed. So pay attention to bylines when you read the paper, set up Google News alerts, do your research, and you'll start to see, who's really covering the topics that you're interested in. And you have to do it regularly because newsrooms change constantly, and people are given different beats, every few months in some cases. So keep that in mind. Also, one thing that's particularly important for statewide campaigns is to look outside of the major media markets. I know when I was working with Voice, who you'll be hearing from Maria on this call about SB 100, the Chicago papers had been covering it a fair amount, the Chicago media, but we wanted to also try to target newspapers in southern Illinois and throughout the state where there were legislators who were maybe on the fence. And so, we definitely looked at those papers and sent pitches to them as well. So keep that in mind. And, they're going to be, smaller papers are going to be very much more open and easy to get to, and TV stations and radio as well. So don't forget about them. Next slide, please. You also want to make sure that you give reporters enough time when you start pitching them. Respect deadlines, as I mentioned before, avoid pitching after 2:30, and keep in mind that while reporters are fast, they're not that fast, and they really do need time to write a good story. So those are really important. I think sometimes people forget that, and it's easy to do that when we're working fast on things, but to keep in mind that they need time to do a good story. So Chelsie, I want to ask you, tell us a little bit about your approach to engaging reporters and keeping track of who's covering your issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So a lot of the things I can share are things that you mentioned. The first thing is that we generally just target reporters who are reporting on things in our field. So at a certain outlet, we're only going to reach out to the education reporter or the person who covers topics most related to our work. And then we really intentionally build relationships with them over time by inviting them to key events, sharing really relevant updates with them about our work. And then we also, you mentioned this, reach out to a lot of local and ethnic media sources that are more likely to be interested in our work and whose readers are our community members. So, we also occasionally get pieces in the LA Times or something like that, but most often we're published in education and community-specific news sources where our base and supporters are reading, and where they're going to be more interested in some, exciting local work that's happening in the community. I think the other thing to share that you might have touched on is that we're also really selective. So we only invite those people that we're building relationships with to cover stories or events when we know we have something really, really compelling, so that those folks we're building relationships know that when Californians for Justice reaches out, that it's something good. So we don't just invite them to everything. And then the thing that's been really impactful for us is including a visual component in all of our events. So we've been really successful in getting media to come to our actions in our local regions and in Sacramento. So we always include a visual component so that reporters know that there's going to be a compelling, exciting image to share in their story. As an example, a couple of years ago, we had a student stage an action at a board meeting in Sacramento where they symbolized the death of quality education by simultaneously dropping to the ground and holding numbered masks over their faces. So it was really dramatic and impactful, and it was a really exciting element for media folks, and we got a lot of great coverage from that. And then the other thing I'll share is that we also always have youth who are prepared to speak with our reporters. So this goes back to some of the things I mentioned when talking about storytelling. These folks don't really want to hear from our staff. They want to hear what young people have to say, and it's been really powerful to prepare some of our students to feel comfortable talking with reporters so that they can share themselves why they're involved in this work, why this is important to them, and that's been really exciting for media folks as well.
Thank you, Chelsie. That's great. You know, one thing I want to add to what Chelsie said is, and I think it's important, she mentioned that, you know, often they're going to the news sources that she knows, that their group knows, people who support them look at, which is great because it helps build up support in a advocacy community, keeping them engaged. That's critical. But as I mentioned, you know, you also want to think in terms of, think a little outside of the box and outside of just, you know, talking to the people who you know who already support you. And that's why it is important to, you know, go after, you know, some of the type of media that you would never necessarily even read in, you know, these small newspapers and that sort of thing. So just something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. So finally, I just want to, before I hand it over to our social media gurus, talk a little bit about how to use communications tools strategically. You know, you want to keep in mind who are you trying to reach, and which tools will help you get there. You know, everything you do doesn't require a media advisory, a press release, an op-ed, an editorial, a letter to the editor. You know, what is going to work? You know, in many cases, particularly, you know, if you have limited resources, limited time, you can just skip the press release. If it's not a super complicated issue, sometimes just sending out a really good pitch to a handful of reporters who you think are likely to cover it is going to be more efficient and effective. That holds true also with press conferences. As Chelsie mentioned, I think it is worth it to have a press conference if you've got a great visual, or just, you know, a knockout speaker that's just going to draw someone there regardless. But often, you know, press conferences, and the reason, you know, that can be important is because TV stations are going to be more likely to cover something, particularly if there's a good visual. But it's a lot of work to do a press conference, and sometimes the payoff just isn't there, because most reporters who are, you know, working on a sort of 24/7 cycle these days, they want to, you know, get the story first. They don't want to know that everyone else is getting it at the same time, so they want to get the story in before the press conference. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about putting together a press conference or even putting out a press release. But I'd love to hear a little more from Chelsie about, you know, what tools you've found particularly effective in grabbing media attention.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just to first clarify, we haven't ever actually held a press conference. Usually at our actions, it's something that we're already doing. So, you know, we're attending a State Board of Education meeting. Part of that is an action outside the meeting where we are already going to have speakers and students, you know, involved in some activity. So that's usually where that piece comes in, where we have reporters attending an event. And then some of the things, I would say the primary way, the tool that we use to get folks to cover our things is media advisories. So that's what we primarily use to get the word out. We email media advisories, we make calls, we kind of pull on those relationships that we've built over time. We always include photos, and we really clearly explain what the visual element of the event is going to be. And then I would say, you know, we're also always trying new things. So today, for example, we have an action in Sacramento. We're going to have some media coverage there. And then we have a couple of dedicated staff who are going to be tweeting updates, you know, just photos and things from the event to reporters that we don't yet have strong relationships with, to build some excitement and hopefully start building some new relationships.
Great. Well, thank you, Chelsie. That's wonderful. It sounds like you guys are doing some great stuff that a lot of people could emulate and I think do really well with. I want to turn things over now to my colleague, Jeanne McCann, who's the Vice President of Digital Media for the Hatcher Group. So take it away, Jeanne.
Great. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Next slide, please. So my job here at the Hatcher Group is to help organizations make smart use of social media to help them advance their goals. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about some smart strategies for running statewide campaigns. And we're going to share with you some very specific examples from real campaigns. And I'll talk about some tactics and things that have worked for us. So as Amy discussed, it's really critically important to get clear about your message. What is it that you want your followers on social media to know or to do? You know, we recommend really just like writing this down and keeping it in front of you, and then making sure all your posts reflect that message. You don't have a lot of room on social media, so you want to just be really tightly on message as often as you can. And the second thing is just to be very deliberate about who you're trying to reach. Who are your targets? You know, I say here you should know your targets better than they know themselves. You want to get to know what are their habits, where do they hang out online, what are they actively posting about. For instance, if you're trying to reach reporters, are they following particular hashtags? And we'll show you some examples of that. But who is it that you want to write about this issue? So it really behooves you to try to do some of that research up front. And you know, Amy has talked about traditional media and ways you can use that. You can use email to reach reporters, but some reporters really prefer to be contacted on Twitter. You have to know that up front so that you make sure you're contacting them in a way that they're going to respond to. And finally, you know, it's really important to know your advocates and who are the people that are going to be helping you, who are your key partners, and make sure you have all of their social media contact information as well so that you don't have to go researching it every time you need it. Next slide, please. So we talk a lot about amplifying your message. You know, I like to use the example, you don't need a lot of followers to really have an impact on social media. It all depends on who retweets you or who interacts with you and who is carrying your message for you. Let's say you have one follower, but it happens to be Oprah Winfrey and she retweets you, you know, you're done. You don't need to do a whole lot else. So it's not so much about a numbers game as it is about the way you're using it. Using the same hashtag is really important to creating a campaign that has some legs. Not only does using a hashtag consistently brand your campaign, it also makes it really easy for you to measure its effectiveness. So we recommend deciding on a hashtag early on and using it consistently, which reminds me, today's hashtag is C4JS. So if you're tweeting about this webinar, we appreciate if you would use that, C4JS. It's also important to get everybody on the same wavelength. So all your partner organizations and all your advocates, you want to communicate with them often and, again, in the ways that they find useful. So often that means creating an email to your partners and putting in it some sample tweets that they can just cut and paste, or some sample posts for Facebook that they can cut and paste, and providing them some memes that they can use. You want to make it super easy for people because, you know, nobody has time to do anything anymore. And so as much as you can make it, you know, cut and paste, the better off you are. We also strongly suggest that you research some other hashtags because every time you use a different hashtag, you get your message out in front of people who are following that hashtag. And I'll show you some examples of how you can do that very effectively. We recommend using Twitter lists, and I'll show you that in a minute. But Twitter lists are a way to sort of to have a subgroup of people that you're following on Twitter that you want to see in one fell swoop. So it could be all your partner organizations, or it could be your legislators that you're trying to reach. It could be reporters that you put on a separate list on Twitter. And then that's a way for you to see very quickly what those folks are tweeting about and provide you an easy way to interact with them. And we also recommend that you use @names, especially on Twitter, where you target particular folks such as legislators or reporters. But you want to do that very selectively because you don't want to aggravate people unnecessarily. Next slide, please. Other ways you can break through the noise, especially to get around getting reporters to notice you. First of all, definitely follow them and like them. Again, I'm mostly talking about Twitter here, but you want to pay attention on other outlets as well, certainly Facebook and increasingly on Instagram. But other ways, you want to retweet their stories. When they do, when they write a story about your issue, it's always helpful to take that and retweet it out to your networks and add a thank you and target that reporter so they know that you've sent out their news stories. Everybody likes to be noticed, you know, and that's a really good way to make sure you get your handle in front of that reporter. And again, find out what hashtags they're following and use those. For instance, in Maryland, during the General Assembly, a lot of our clients are super active on Twitter, and the reporters were following the MDGA16, Maryland General Assembly hashtag. So great, we started using that hashtag as well for a lot of our campaigns. And reporters noticed that, and they started retweeting us and interacting with us. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about hashtags. I'm all about the hashtag, and this is a great tool, free tool called Hashtagify. You can just Google it to find it. And it allows you to research either hashtags that you already know about, or when you're trying to create a new unique hashtag. This can tell you how many, you know, is anyone else using that hashtag, and who are those people, and how is it being used. So just as an example here, forward, so we can blow that up, please. Can you, there we go. We researched Flip the Frame, which Chelsie was just talking about as a hashtag, and Hashtagify shows you what are the other people who are using Flip the Frame on Twitter, what other hashtags are they likely to be using. And so you can see here, lots of people who use Flip the Frame also use Shut It Down, also use juvenile justice, use students, mindfulness, restorative justice. And this tool allows you to click on any of those related hashtags, and you can see who are the most influential users of those hashtags. It's just another way of helping get your tweets in front of broader audiences. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to turn it over to Maria and Juan of Communities United and Voice, and they're going to talk to you a bit about two campaigns, Straight Out of Voice and Keep It SB 100. Maria, can you talk about how and why you chose those particular hashtags?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm getting a little sick, so let me know if I need to repeat anything. So Juan is with me, and he can jump in whenever you feel like Juan. But the campaign we really have is the Keep It SB 100. One of the things, though, like that we use to make sure that in our campaign that we keep the momentum going and we keep things relatable. So the reason why we chose the hashtag Keep It SB 100, and one can tell you a little bit about it, is that like one thing that the young folks are using right now is keeping it real, right, and keeping it 100. And so before we actually filed our bill, this was still a popular saying. And so we were very strategic in using the 100 symbol into our campaign. And so because the whole point of it was to really talk about why we need to change the narrative of how young folks are perceived, especially when it comes to ending the school-to-prison pipeline. And so when we filed our bill, we were very specific with our legislator around filing our bill under 100, and so that throughout the entire campaign, our hashtag was Keep It SB 100, into relation of like keeping it real and keeping the narrative of young people being the center of how to interrupt the school-to-prison pipeline. And in terms of the Straight Out of Voice piece, that was really one of the things that came out when it came to a lot of the trends. When the movie Straight Outta Compton came out, a lot of people were using the filter Straight Out of, and so a lot of the folks that we were working with felt that this is something that we do, right, as a pride of keeping it SB100 and keep being part of Voice, and this is our Straight Out of Voice. You can see on your screen that there's a lot of different media pieces that we've used, including YouTube video to promote the hashtag KeepItSB100, along with like different facts throughout the campaign.
Alexis, actually, can you go forward one? Excuse me 1 second. And this is Maria and Juan. Maybe you can talk about this change.org petition.
Oh, sorry. So one of the things that that we worked on is to really support SB100. So there are different ways that we've been trying to keep the momentum of our work. So a lot of it we promoted through the video on YouTube, a lot of it being active in different platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And another piece was spreading the word of what SB100 was and what it does, right? And so SB100 was really about, it's a statewide policy that ended zero tolerance and put a cap on suspensions and how you can use them and when you can use them. And so change.org is something that we use to spread the word around what, what folks can do to support SB100 and for them to sign it and to spread the word about the work. And I think like in terms of sharing, I think Juan, if you wanted to add a little bit.
Hello? Oh, okay. Hi everyone, this is Juan Padilla. And what I want to add also is that with change.org, when I was, as a young person, when I was sharing that with a lot of my friends, they actually started noticing about the posts that I would make, and my my friends and boys were also making and using the hashtag KeepItSB100. And although people were noticing the hashtag and they really liked it, they didn't know about what it was about. So I was talking to them about SB100 and how it's one of the bills that's going to be able to dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline. And now the school-to-prison pipeline, it's a term that a lot of young folks don't really use these days. Like when I talk to my peers about the school-to-prison pipeline, they don't know what that is. So, which is why using keeping it SB100 made everything more simpler to let people know about the school-to-prison pipeline and talking to them about how young folks are getting arrested for petty things. And with change.org, after explaining to them what the school-to-prison pipeline was about, I would share them the link to our petition, and it's also like way easier for people to be able to sign petitions through the internet instead of like going in actual person. So that's all I have to add.
That's great. Thank you so much. And you're seeing this, I guess this is a screenshot from the video, these instructional days. Sorry, I'm driving Alexis crazy. If you hit the space bar and go to the next one again. There we go. I just want to point out that statistics like these are fantastic to use on social media. Twitter especially loves these kinds of statistics, so I really like that that image a lot. And then the next image, Alexis, and here's the results. So well done, really well done. And I think another thing, Maria, that you've mentioned before is just keeping things relatable, and using that Keep It SB100 is a perfect example of that. When people are used to saying Keep It 100, and you just added a little twist to it, and that's awesome. Next slide, please. And so one of the other things I'd like to remind people is to be engaging. Everyone has so much coming at them all of the time in terms of information and in terms of social media. You're just deluged. And so it's really hard to break through all of that noise. So some of the ways that you can do that is by using very compelling content, such as powerful statistics like we just saw, and using compelling photos. I also recommend that if you have a post or a tweet that has gotten a lot of interactions and gotten a lot of positive feedback, you can reuse that, and you should reuse that, because only a small portion of your audience sees any of your posts at any one time. So feel free, if something works well, get it out there again. Also, we recommend tapping into news hooks and trending topics and holidays. So news hooks, certainly Black Lives Matter, absolutely, everything that's going on right now. Trending topics you can find on both Twitter and Facebook. And if you can find something that you can make hay out of and you can tag onto, definitely do that. And things like holidays even. We did a campaign here in Maryland. It was around, totally different topic, but around pesticide control that was really harming the bee population. And so it was Valentine's Day, and we were trying to reach legislators. So we created some little memes around Happy Valentine's Day with bees buzzing around them, those sorts of things. Don't be boring. Be yourself, because your own voice is what's different and unique about you. And so really celebrate that and take some risks and get out there. Next slide, please. And here are some examples. Maria, you might want to talk, and Juan, talk about some of these.
Oh, sorry. We're just trying to figure out the phone system.
Hello?
Hello?
Okay, hi. So with this picture saying, not sure if Noble Charters better prepare students for ACT or if they kick poor test takers out, hashtag charter push out. And with that image, what it is it's a meme, and we would use this a lot because young people tend to share memes a lot. But the other thing is that making sure that the memes are also relevant to the issue that we were talking about. And Maria, did you want to add?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, and I think this is one of the many memes that we've used. We've also used the Jackie Chan one where he was really confused. So these are really relatable memes where folks you feel that emotion, right? So this guy is from Futurama. I don't know if a lot of you know him, but so with that, he's really famous for not knowing which is which in terms of decision, and just about conspiracies. And so at this piece, this wasn't actually part of our SB 100 campaign. This was part of our charter push-out campaign. But this is just one example that we did. And so for a lot of the ways that we try to keep things relatable, we've tried to use, we've done memes, we've done infographics, we do the things about statistics. A lot of it has to be visual, just because a lot of our folks are visual. I think there's another picture in here about a selfie.
There's a couple of them. There we go.
Right, there you go.
So tell us who these people are.
Oh, okay. So, for example, the young folks that are in the pictures, I think you can tell who they are. They're the ones that are really short. So those are young people who have been lobbying and educating legislators around SB 100 and why they need to support SB 100 and why the school prison pipeline needs to end. And then that tall man right there, his name escapes me for some reason right now, but he's one of the representatives that we were working with and who said yes to our bill. So every time a legislator would say yes, the young folks would take a selfie with them. And Juan has been one of those many young people that have asked for selfies. So Juan, I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, and that was basically the plan. We would take selfies after representatives or senators would agree to support our bill. And the people that you see in the pictures are one of the young folks that I worked alongside to be able to lobby at the Capitol. And just one experience that I want to share is that when recently me and other young people went to Springfield to talk about a different bill. We were actually like, it was a really fun experience because after we took the selfie with a representative, she actually took us inside the floor where they make all the decision making, and she decided that she wanted to take a picture in there, and she told us that a lot of people don't get to come in here, but that we were very special and that she wanted us to be part of that. So it was a really fun experience, and with selfies, it keeps all of this relevant and like basically to this present social media.
No, it's wonderful. I love this, and of course, politicians are not generally too shy around having their pictures taken. So that's an awesome technique to get them on the record and give them some good publicity. You know, it's terrific. Next slide, please. So here's just a list of some tools that I've mentioned and that we find really helpful. As you just saw, petitions can be great to drive interest in your cause and to generate attention, both from the advocacy community and from elected officials, especially state or local ones. Twitter chats is another thing and I think some of you, maybe Chelsie, have had a good experience with Twitter chats, but holding a Twitter chat, which can be like a 1-hour online conversation around a very particular hashtag, can really generate a lot of interest, can get your issue in front of a wider number of folks than just your followers. We use TweetReach, which is another free tool that you should all know about to track particular hashtags. So you do a campaign on a particular hashtag, you can generate a TweetReach report. It will pull all of the tweets that use that hashtag and rank them for you and show you how much reach each one got and who used it. It's a great tool for reporting back out to, to your advocates, to your board, to your CEO. And Hashtagify we already talked about. Follower Wonk is another great tool that helps you analyze any particular Twitter handle and find out when its followers are posting, and all kinds of demographics about those followers, where they're from and how influential they are. Probably most people are familiar with Hootsuite and TweetDeck, which are great tools for helping you schedule your posts. Twitter and Facebook Analytics, of course, we like a lot. Again, can help you with reporting back out. And I think people forget, you ask for help from all your advocates. Sometimes we don't do a great job letting them know what happened. So it's always good to send out, hey, you guys generated, 2 million, a reach of 2 million people. That's nice for you to give that kind of feedback. And Canva and Easily are two free tools, mostly free or very low cost, that can help you put together simple memes. Next slide, please. So I talked a bit about Twitter lists. I just want to show you an example of how you can use them. They're an easy way, again, to keep track of subgroups of people and organizations on Twitter. So I pulled this from the People's Lobby, which I believe is a Chicago organization working on these issues. And you can see these are some of the lists that they have generated. These are public lists, so you can follow these as well and use them to see who are the progressive bloggers, for instance, who are the Chicago journalists. They have 72 members on that. And you can do the same thing. You can create your own, or you can just follow ones that are on there. But it helps you just see what that particular group of folks is tweeting about, and allows you to easily interact with them or retweet them or whatever. Next slide, or next image, please. So here's another example of some Twitter lists. I find this is from a former colleague of mine, Danielle Tarr. I find Twitter lists are really helpful to use at conferences, and you can sort of create them on the go. If you have a conference hashtag, find people that are using it and add them to a Twitter list. So here's examples of like Clean Water Connects, Com Network 2013. These are all conferences. and those were all the people we could find tweeting on a certain subject. Also, when you put somebody on a Twitter list, I should mention they get a notice that you've put them on a Twitter list. So pay attention to how you're naming your lists. If you name the list Best Education Reporters and you add a reporter to that list, they get a note, hey, you've been added to Best Education Reporters, and that's a good thing. People like that. Next slide. Another tool, whoops, one more I think. Back one, please. So Chelsea's going to walk us through thunderclaps and tell us how she has used these successfully.
Yeah. So Thunderclap is a website that allows you to create a social media campaign where you have a bunch of supporters send out the same social media post at the same time on the same date to create a kind of thunderclap effect online around your event or message. So you have people sign on through the Thunderclap website with their social media accounts, and you have to get at least 100 supporters for the Thunderclap to go out. So if you've reached 100 or more supporters, that's people who have gone onto the Thunderclap website, signed on with their social media account, then on the date and time that you've specified, the same message for every person goes out at once on the social media accounts of everyone who signed in. So we've used this several times to create a buzz around events, to share petition links, or to target a decision maker on a particular issue. So the strategy has worked for us because it helps to build excitement around your campaign. It's kind of like a fun thing to be a part of. And I think most of all, it gives supporters a really, really simple action that they can take right now to support your efforts. It's one click, you sign on, and then the Thunderclap website kind of does the rest of the work for you. And it's a great way to get your message out there. So Thunderclap also shares with you what your reach is at the end of the Thunderclap. We've generally had about 100 or just over 100 supporters, and the reach is always in the thousands. So as you can see here, we've done it several times. This particular Thunderclap, we were targeting the governor and the State Board of Education around the local control funding formula. So we had a link to our petition. We called out Governor Brown. We used our hashtags in there. And with just 114 people, we had a reach of 80,000 people. So it can be pretty powerful for sharing your message, and is something that's really, really easy to get people to take action to do.
That's terrific. It's a great example. We've used it a lot here at the Hatcher Group as well. One thing I will just note is that you can't actually target by using a person's handle in the Thunderclap. They don't allow that, but I think you did it exactly the right way by sending people to a petition, which will then go on to the governor. So very well done. And it does take a bit of promotion to reach your goal, but you can have really amazing results from using Thunderclap. So I think now we're going to turn it back over to Allison to take questions.
Thank you, Jeanne. So that was all fantastic information, and just a reminder to the folks that are tuning in by phone to hit pound 103 pound to ask questions. And as you're doing that, you can also be typing your questions into the question box and into the chat box, and we'll get to those questions as well. We have one question here for any of you who want to answer the question, and I think that Voice and CFJ have really demonstrated this very well. But one of the questions that we've gotten in the question box is, do you include photos in your press advisories? Amy, do you want to take that first?
Sure. Yes. I think it's, unless part of the problem with including photos is that, if you're, sometimes if something is too photo heavy, it may not go through newsroom organization spam filters. This is a real issue. In fact, we always, as a general rule, if I'm pitching a reporter and I'm using a media advisory or press release, I put it in the body of the email rather than attaching it. So if you have a photo that you think is really going to grab people, great. Or if you have a small infographic that tells the story in a way that, you know, a lot of news organizations will like, I think it's worth it. But it certainly isn't a requirement. I mean, one thing you can always do as an alternative is, you know, let the reporter know that you have photos, that you have, you know, charts that they can use if they're interested.
Yeah, and I think for our end, for voice, we typically don't also add photos. We try to be as descriptive as possible. So if especially, I think Californians for Justice also added this where, you know, we try to add as much visuals to our events, and then we try to describe those visuals in our media advisory to show that there is going to be some visual component in our event. However, attaching the image is not something that we prioritize. We do add logos, and those are pictures. So.
Yes, you should add your logos, definitely. Definitely do that.
Californians for Justice, we always use a photo. We don't just attach it to the email. You know, it's like it's in our media advisory. There's usually one photo. That's been helpful for us. I think it's helpful. It's been helpful for us to have reporters see who are the people who are going to be at this event. What's the style? I guess that's how to describe it. It helps to kind of convey the style of our event and our work. So that's been helpful for us. We haven't had too much of a problem with spam, but it's usually just one photo. Like, you know, the media advisory we send is a PDF, and there's a photo within it.
Great. Thank you all. Any other questions from folks who are participating? And a reminder that if you're on the phone, to unmute by hitting #103#. If you are listening by the audio on your computers, you can just hit the little microphone that's there in the toolbox until it turns green, and we'll be able to hear you. Questions? And maybe as folks are gearing up, I'll put a question out there to the group. And my question is really about measuring success. So I think, you know, certainly many of the groups that we support are supported by others in philanthropy, and really want to be able to measure their success in a variety of different ways, and including their communications work. So Amy and Jeanne, any ideas from you and from Chelsie and Juan and Maria as well about the ways that people can be tracking their results? So certainly the number of stories placed, or the number of folks signing a petition for, you know, a statewide campaign, but what are some of the other indicators of success for any communications strategy, and especially for statewide campaigns?
Jeanne, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
So, well, of course, if you accomplished your goal, that's a great measure if you got your bill passed. But short of that, certainly the things you just mentioned, numbers often resonate with funders. And social media numbers can be really powerful numbers. And I mentioned the importance of hashtags and using them consistently. And that's one of the things, you know, it's certainly not the end-all and be-all. And just because you got a lot of reach on a hashtag doesn't mean behavior has changed or, you know, you're done. But it can be powerful to show those sorts of numbers, and to be able to say, and here are some of the very influential people who used our hashtag. And as I mentioned earlier, that, you know, there are many tools out there that will help craft those kinds of reports for you, but one of the best and easiest is tweet reach. And we often will run those reports because they're a very easy way for people to quickly see how much success you've had with a particular hashtag.
And from a traditional media perspective, we routinely, after we've, say, been involved in a release of a report or something else where we're pitching reporters, we will, create a document that basically lists all the stories. And you can do that, pretty easily with Google Alerts. There are more sophisticated services that are expensive, like Vocus, where we run big reports, but that's pricey. But just really keeping track of those stories through Google Alerts and using, a variety of, use your organization in the Google Alert, use the reporters' names that you think can cover it, use the topic, so you're sure to capture anything related to it. And we'll put together a nice, PDF that has all the links and the stories, and funders love those.
We should probably also mention Storify.
Yeah, I was going to mention
I'll just
Storify.
throw that out there. If people don't know about Storify, it's a way to capture your social media posts, to capture the amount of activity around your social media posts, so you can capture everyone who's retweeted you or shared your posts on Facebook and put it in a nice online document. I'm sure people are pretty familiar with it, but it can be great to show again, here's an actual post from somebody influential who's taken our message and shared it for us.
I also wanted to add, just for Voice and Communities United, in terms of our measurements of like how well we're doing, the way that we've done it before, we don't really have an actual paper that we use to track things. However, we pay very close attention to our social media presence, and in terms of traditional media, we pay attention to how much media comes out to our events, and we pay attention to how we message and how we frame the day or the event. In terms of social media, we always track if we have trended or not. We've trended on a few occasions, particularly with SB 100 and with our Fight for 15 work, which is another campaign about union workers' rights. So the way we typically do it is if we trended, we would get a notification on any of our social media pages. And the way that we make sure we do that is one of the lessons learned that we've had is that we actually have to collect all of the handles of the folks that are the allies and the people who talk about this particular issue. And what we do is we send out a list of all those handles so that we can all stay connected and we can all support each other's work in social media. So then it could just be a small thing as hey, this is, the event is starting, and we're able to tag all the other different organizations, and so we can start the trend of talking about the day. And really a couple to that was just while we collect handles, another piece for us has been, really just being strategic around how much we send out. So we try to, because obviously if you're in the moment, it's harder to tweet. So what we do is we try to have the agenda ahead of time, and we try to schedule the tweets as much as possible so that we can, while we're engaged in different types of work, we're still active in social media.
That's great. Thank you all. There are no other questions in the question box. Anyone who is listening want to weigh in? So I'll ask one more question. Jeanne, of you mentioned that folks should really build relationships with reporters before they reach out, and I know we talked about this on the previous webinar. And you said, you should know whether reporters prefer Twitter or email or some other means of communication. what is the best way for people to know how to reach out to reporters and media?
Actually,
That's
maybe
a really
Jeanne,
good
you want
question.
me to
But
talk
go
about
ahead,
that?
yeah, Amy, go for it.
Yeah, I can yeah, I mean, some of this is trial and error, but there are also some things, like I've had situations where, you know, nothing's getting through, and then I go and I check their Twitter feed, and I see that they have like thousands and thousands of followers, and they have this fancy Twitter page, and they're all, so this looks like someone who, you know, uses Twitter a lot, and I have literally like tweeted something to them, oh, you know, sent you an email, just wanted to make sure you saw it, and I've heard back immediately. So now sort of routinely, if I, you know, I always use email initially, but if I'm not getting a response, I go and check, you know, what they're doing on Twitter, and then decide, you know, are they someone who's going to be easiest to reach that way.
That's right. I think that's exactly right. I would always start with email and see if that works for you. But, you know, if you're trying to reach somebody, it definitely, you should know who that person is. And that means knowing how do they interact with the world. Are they on Twitter? Find them, watch what they're doing on Twitter. Just like you know which stories they've already written and what they like to write about, you want to make sure you know how they are behaving on various social media outlets.
Thank you both. Are there any other questions? If no, just a reminder that the last in the summer learning series that we're doing, the last webinar is on Tuesday, August 9th from 12:30 to 2 p.m. And this one will be about negative backlash, how to deal with negative backlash, and how to really include a rapid response strategy in your communications work. Many, many thanks again to Chelsie Brooks of Californians for Justice, Maria De Guillo of Voices of Youth in Chicago Education, or VOICE, and Juan Padilla, also of VOICE. And thanks to Amy Saltzman and Jeanne McCann of the Hatcher Group. Thank you all so much for joining us and for educating us today. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.